Emma had always loved the city, but lately, the noise and rush of it all felt like too much. The traffic, the endless work emails, the constant pressure, it was all weighing her down. So when her best friend Lily called with an invitation, she didn't think twice. "Come with me to my brother's beach house in California. We'll spend a week by the ocean." "You need a break," Lily had said. Emma had agreed immediately. 2 days later, she was stepping off the train, suitcase in hand, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The salty air hit her, and she breathed in deeply. It felt like freedom. Lily was waiting for her, waving excitedly. "You're here." "Finally!" She laughed, hugging her tightly. Emma couldn't stop smiling. The drive to the house was short, winding along roads that opened up to views of the sea. The closer they got, the more her heart began to relax. She hadn't even seen the house yet, but already she felt lighter. When they pulled up, Emma's breath caught. The house wasn't huge, but it was beautiful. White walls, big windows, and a porch that faced the ocean. She could hear the waves even from the driveway. Lily grabbed her bag and led her inside. "It's simple, but you'll love it here," she said. And then she saw him. Daniel, Lily's older brother. Emma remembered him as a boy, tall, quiet, always reading in his room when she and Lily were kids. But the man standing in the kitchen now was different. He looked older, of course, maybe 32 or so, but it wasn't just age. He carried himself differently. His shoulders were broader, his presence calmer. His dark hair was a little messy, and he wore a plain gray t-shirt. But the way he looked at her, steady, curious, made her suddenly aware of herself in a way she hadn't expected. "Emma," he said, giving a small smile. His voice was deeper than she remembered, warm, but reserved. "Daniel," she replied, trying to sound casual, though her heart gave a small jump. Lily grinned, oblivious to the spark in the air. "Come on, I'll show you your room." The house was cozy inside, with sunlit rooms and the faint smell of the sea carried in by the breeze. Emma's room faced the water, the curtains fluttering gently. She dropped her bag on the bed and peeked out the window, seeing the stretch of sand that seemed endless. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Later, after unpacking, Emma changed into her bikini and threw on a light cover. She wanted to feel the sun on her skin. As she stepped outside onto the porch, coffee cup in hand, she noticed Daniel sitting there with a book. He looked relaxed, his long legs stretched out, the sunlight hitting his face. He glanced up when he heard her. Their eyes met for just a moment longer than normal. Then he smiled politely and returned his gaze to the page. Emma sat on the steps pretending to focus on the ocean, but her mind wasn't on the waves. It was on him. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. He was just Lily's older brother. That was all. But she couldn't deny what she felt when he looked at her. That flicker of recognition, like he saw her not as his sister's friend, but as someone entirely new. They didn't talk much that morning, only a few small words here and there. But Emma noticed things. The way his voice softened when he asked if she liked her room. The way his eyes lingered just a second before he looked away. She told herself she was imagining it, yet deep inside, she knew she wasn't. By the time Lily called her from inside, asking if she wanted to join them for a walk, Emma's heart was already restless. She couldn't explain it, but something had shifted. The trip she thought would just be a week of relaxation suddenly felt like something else entirely. Like the beginning of something she wasn't ready for, but couldn't stop from happening. That night, Emma lay in bed listening to the waves crashing outside. She should have been asleep, but her mind replayed the way Daniel had looked at her, the quiet strength in his voice, the way the air between them had felt charged even though they'd barely spoken. It was only the first day, and yet she already knew this wasn't going to be just another summer. The next morning began with the sound of waves crashing against the shore and gulls calling overhead. Emma woke to sunlight spilling through the thin curtains. She pulled herself out of bed, still carrying the restless energy from the night before. It wasn't just the excitement of being near the ocean. It was something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. When she stepped outside, the others were already making plans. Lily was bouncing with excitement, asking Daniel to come surfing with them. He shook his head with a small smile. "You know I'm not a surfer," he said. Lily rolled her eyes, then looked at Emma. "Come on, you'll join us, right?" Emma hesitated. She wanted to spend time with her friend, but the idea of staying behind wasn't unpleasant. "Maybe later," she said. "I think I'll just relax today." Lily shrugged, already distracted, and soon she and the others were carrying surfboards down to the beach, leaving Emma and Daniel behind. For a moment, silence hung between them. Daniel had gone back to his chair on the porch, a book in his hand, but Emma could see that he wasn't really reading. She wandered down to the sand, letting the water lap at her ankles. The air smelled of salt and wildflowers carried in by the breeze. After a few minutes, she heard his voice behind her. "Not a fan of surfing either?" She turned to find him walking slowly toward her, hands in his pockets. His tone was light, but his eyes held a quiet curiosity. "I guess I like calmer things," she admitted. "The sea is beautiful on its own. You don't always have to fight the waves." He stopped beside her, both of them looking out at the endless blue horizon. "That's true," he said softly. "Sometimes it's better to just watch." They started walking together without deciding to. The sand was warm under their feet, the water rushing in and out as though it was listening to their words. They talked about simple things at first: the town nearby, the best places to get food, how unpredictable the tides could be. But slowly the conversation drifted into something deeper. Emma told him how city life had begun to feel suffocating, how she felt like she was constantly running but never really getting anywhere. Daniel listened quietly, his face thoughtful. "I used to feel that way too," he said at last. "That's why I bought this house. It's small, but here, time slows down." Emma glanced at him, curious. "Do you ever miss it? The rush, the noise?" He shook his head. "Not anymore. I think I learned to appreciate the quiet." There was something in the way he said it that made her chest tighten. He didn't just mean the quiet of the beach. He meant the quiet inside himself. And Emma realized she wanted to know more, to see the parts of him that weren't obvious at first glance. The walk stretched longer than she had planned. The sun climbed higher, painting the sky in dazzling shades of blue and white. The heat pressed against them, but the wind from the sea kept it soft. When they finally sat down on a rock near the water, Emma pulled her knees to her chest, brushing hair from her face. Daniel sat beside her, not too close, not too far. "You look like you're carrying more than you let on," he said quietly, surprising her. She blinked, then laughed nervously. "Do I? You do," he said simply. "Most people don't notice, but I've always been good at seeing things others miss." The words stayed with her, echoing inside. She wasn't used to people noticing. Not like that. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Before she could answer, Lily's voice carried faintly from down the beach. The group was back, shouting and laughing as they pulled their surfboards out of the water. The moment between her and Daniel dissolved, but the weight of it lingered. That night, as the sun set, the sky turned orange and pink, reflecting on the waves. Emma found herself standing on the porch again. Daniel was there too, leaning against the railing with his arms crossed. "You didn't swim today," she teased lightly, breaking the silence. He smiled faintly. "I told you, I'm more of a watcher than a swimmer." She raised an eyebrow. "And what do you watch?" His eyes shifted to hers, steady and unreadable. "Everything," he said softly. Emma looked away quickly, her cheeks warming. She didn't know how to answer, but her heart was racing again, just like it had that morning. Later, when the house was quiet, she lay awake in bed, her thoughts restless. She replayed their walk, the softness in his voice, the way his eyes had lingered on her when she teased him. She tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, that he was just being polite, just talking the way anyone would. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Daniel wasn't loud, he wasn't obvious, but there was something there, something she couldn't ignore, something that pulled her closer to him, even though she didn't understand why. The ocean outside roared like it knew her secret. like it carried the truth she wasn't ready to say aloud. It had only been 2 days, and already her heart was changing its rhythm. The morning began quietly. Emma woke later than usual, the sunlight already spilling bright across her room. The sound of laughter outside told her Lily and the others had left early for another surf session. She stretched, enjoying the silence of the house. For once, it felt like she had the beach and the day to herself. She wandered into the kitchen in a loose shirt, pouring herself a glass of water. When she turned, Daniel was standing there, leaning against the counter. He was dressed simply, a white t-shirt and shorts, but there was something about the way he carried himself, calm, steady, that always made her heart trip. "You didn't go either?" she asked. He shook his head with a faint smile. "Not my kind of morning. Thought I'd stay back and keep the house company." Emma laughed softly, though her pulse had already quickened. There it was again, that strange comfort and tension every time they spoke. "Maybe we're both lazy," she teased. "Or maybe we both just like quiet," he replied, his eyes flicking toward her for a moment before he looked away. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, alive, like the air before a storm. Emma suddenly felt restless, like her skin was buzzing. She grabbed her towel and cover, forcing a playful smile. "Well, if we're both staying, I might as well swim today. But only if you don't just sit there and watch." Daniel arched a brow, half amused. "I make no promises." Emma laughed again, but the sound was thinner this time. She slipped out the back door and walked barefoot across the warm sand. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, the waves rolling in slow and steady. She dropped her towel onto the sand, the breeze tugging at her hair. For a moment, she hesitated. She could feel his eyes on her from the porch, though he hadn't moved closer. She told herself it didn't matter, that it was just Daniel, her friend's older brother, a man who rarely let his guard down. And yet, something about being seen by him made her heartbeat scatter. She slipped off her cover, the sunlight catching on her skin. Standing there in her bikini, she turned her face toward the water. But a wild thought struck her. Without letting herself overthink, she unclipped the straps and let the bikini top slide into her hands. The wind brushed against her bare shoulders, cool against her warm skin. Emma wasn't sure why she did it. It wasn't about showing off, and it wasn't about the ocean. It was about him. About the way he had looked at her the past few days. Careful, restrained, as though he was holding back something he didn't dare say. Slowly, she turned just enough to glance back at the porch. Daniel was still there. His book lay forgotten on the table. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking. His eyes were locked on her, and in that instant, Emma felt the full weight of his gaze. It wasn't just attraction. It was fire, raw and unguarded, burning brighter than the sun itself. Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected surprise, maybe a quick look away, but not this. Not the way his eyes stayed on her, steady, unflinching, as if he couldn't look anywhere else. The world seemed to pause. The waves crashed softly behind her, the gulls cried overhead, but all she could hear was the wild rhythm of her own heartbeat. For the first time, Daniel looked nothing like the quiet, careful man she thought she knew. His expression was fierce, undone, like she had broken through walls he had spent years building. Emma's hands tightened on the fabric she held. She wasn't embarrassed. Instead, she felt powerful, vulnerable, and alive all at once. Something electric passed between them, stronger than words, stronger than reason. Daniel finally moved, standing slowly, his shoulders tense. He took a step toward the sand, then stopped, as if fighting himself. His jaw tightened, and even from a distance she could see the struggle in his eyes. "Emma." His voice was low, rougher than she'd ever heard it. Just her name, but it carried the weight of everything he couldn't say. She swallowed hard, unable to answer. She wanted to speak, to explain, but nothing came out. And then, just as the air between them reached its breaking point, the sound of laughter echoed down the beach. Lily and the others were back, their voices bright and careless as they carried surfboards toward the house. Emma's heart jolted. Quickly, she turned back toward the water, slipping the bikini top against her chest and pulling her cover over her shoulders. Her hands trembled slightly, not from shame, but from the intensity of what had just happened. When she glanced back again, Daniel was still standing there, his eyes locked on hers. He hadn't looked away once, and though no one else seemed to notice what had passed between them, she knew the moment was carved deep, impossible to forget. Their gazes held for one last heartbeat before he finally looked down, his hand brushing across his face as if trying to steady himself. Emma turned away, joining the group as they chattered about the waves, pretending nothing had happened. But inside she was trembling, because she knew something had changed, something neither of them could take back. That night, as the house grew quiet again, Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling. She kept replaying it in her mind. The way his eyes had burned, the way her name had sounded on his lips, the fire between them that had nearly consumed her. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heartbeat still racing. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. Daniel wasn't just Lily's brother anymore. He was something else entirely, something dangerous, something irresistible, something that made her feel more alive than she ever had before. The ocean roared outside, steady and endless, as if it already knew the storm that had begun between them. The house was full of noise when everyone returned from the beach. Wet towels were dropped on chairs, surfboards leaned against the wall, and laughter echoed from the kitchen as Lily made sandwiches. Emma moved among them, smiling, answering questions, but her mind wasn't there. Her heart was still back on the sand, locked in that moment when Daniel's eyes had burned into hers. She could feel him even now. He was across the room, quiet as always, putting away dishes while the others talked loudly around him. But every time she looked up, she found him already watching her. Not openly, not obviously, but enough for her to know he hadn't forgotten either. The weight of it pressed on her all through the afternoon. She tried to distract herself, but everything felt heightened. The sound of the waves through the open windows, the heat of the sun on her skin, the way her pulse raced whenever he walked too close. She had never been so aware of someone before. Later, as the group settled in to nap or scroll through their phones, Emma slipped outside to the porch. The air was cooler now, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and distant flowers. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her thoughts. She didn't hear him at first, but then Daniel stepped onto the porch, the door clicking softly shut behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was louder than words. Finally, Daniel moved closer, not too close, but enough that she felt the tension in the air. His voice was low, quiet but intense. "Emma, do you even know what you're doing to me?" Her breath caught. The question was raw, not polished or careful. It wasn't the kind of thing he usually said. She turned toward him, searching his face. He looked different now. His calm mask had slipped, and she could see the fire he had been trying to hide. "I wasn't trying to," she began, but her voice faltered. The truth was, she had been. At least a part of her had wanted to see if he would break, if the man who always stayed in control would finally let something show. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I've been holding it back since you got here. Every time I see you, every time you smile. Emma, it's killing me." The honesty in his voice struck her harder than anything else could have. She didn't know what to say. Her heart was racing, her hands trembling slightly, but she couldn't look away. The moment felt fragile, dangerous, and yet, it was the most alive she had ever felt. She took a small step toward him, her eyes locked on his. The space between them was heavy with everything unspoken, but before she could answer, a burst of laughter came from inside. Lily's voice rang out, calling Emma's name. The spell shattered instantly. Emma stepped back quickly, pulling her cover tighter around her shoulders. Her cheeks flushed, her pulse wild, but she forced herself to breathe. She couldn't let Lily see, couldn't let anyone guess what had just passed between them. Daniel straightened, his jaw tight, his expression guarded again. He gave a small nod, almost like a warning to stay quiet. She nodded back, her chest aching from the weight of what they couldn't say. The rest of the evening blurred. The group cooked dinner together, shared stories, and played music in the living room. Emma laughed when she was supposed to, answered when someone asked her a question, but all the while she felt Daniel's presence in the room like gravity. Every time she looked up, he was there, leaning against the wall, quiet but watchful, his eyes meeting hers for a second too long. When the others began to drift off to bed, Emma lingered in the kitchen, rinsing a glass slowly just to have something to do. She could feel him behind her before she even turned. "Emma," he said softly, his voice just above a whisper. She turned, the glass slipping slightly in her hands before she caught it. He was closer now, close enough that she could see the way his eyes darkened in the low light. "We can't keep doing this," he said, though the tension in his voice made it sound less like a decision and more like a plea. Her throat tightened. "I know," she whispered, but neither of them moved. For one heartbeat, then another, they stood there in the quiet kitchen, the distance between them so thin it could have vanished with a single step. Emma's chest rose and fell quickly, her mind screaming at her to walk away, but her body rooted to the spot. She wanted to reach out, to close the gap, to see what would happen if they stopped pretending, and yet they didn't. From upstairs, footsteps creaked across the floor. Someone was still awake. The fragile moment broke again, and Daniel stepped back, his face turning away. Emma gripped the counter to steady herself, her breath uneven. She knew this wasn't the end of it. Not even close. What had sparked between them had only grown stronger, hotter, and no amount of silence could smother it now. When she finally lay in bed that night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there, the way his voice had cracked when he said her name, the way his eyes burned when he told her she had no idea what she was doing to him. Her chest ached with longing, her thoughts tangled with fear and excitement. This was dangerous. It was wrong in so many ways, and yet it was the only thing she could think about. The sound of the waves outside was steady, endless, but inside Emma felt the storm raging louder than ever, and she knew, whatever happened next, nothing between them would ever be the same. The night was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the waves. Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her body tired, but her mind alive with fire. She couldn't stop thinking of Daniel, his voice, his eyes, the way he had looked at her earlier, like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't step away from. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard him whisper her name. Sleep was impossible. Finally, unable to stay still, she slipped out of her room. The house was dark, everyone else asleep. She moved quietly down the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. The soft glow of the porch light drew her outside, and when she stepped onto the deck, she found him there. Daniel sat alone, leaning against the railing, staring at the stars as if they held the answers he couldn't find anywhere else. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he'd already sensed her presence. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head, his voice low. "Not tonight." Emma moved closer, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool night air. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She just stood there, listening to the sound of the waves, the silence between them heavy with all that remained unspoken. Finally, she found her voice. "About earlier?" Daniel turned then, his eyes meeting hers. In the dim light, they looked darker, more vulnerable than she had ever seen them. "Emma," he began, his tone rough, "I need you to understand something. I've been trying to fight this since the moment you stepped into this house. You're younger, you're my sister's best friend, and I told myself it couldn't happen. But then you looked at me the way you did today. And when you—" He stopped, shaking his head, as if the memory itself was too much. "It was hotter than the sun. I couldn't breathe." Her chest tightened. She had wanted to hear the truth. But now that it was spilling out, it felt overwhelming. Too real. "Daniel," she whispered, her throat dry. He stood then, closing the small space between them. Not too close, not far either, just enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him. His voice dropped softer now. "I'm not supposed to feel this way. But I do, every second. Every time you smile, every time you walk into a room, I can't turn it off." Emma's hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that her heart had been racing since the first morning she saw him on the porch. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she looked at him, her eyes shining with the storm inside her. Neither of them moved. The air between them was thick, fragile, and alive. She could feel the pull, stronger than reason, stronger than fear. It would take only one step to close the gap, one small act to change everything. But then Daniel exhaled sharply and turned his face toward the ocean. If we let this happen, it will hurt Lily. It will hurt you, maybe even me, and I can't do that. His words cut through her chest like a blade, but she understood. He was right. This wasn't just about them. The world around them mattered, and the risks were too heavy to ignore. Still, her heart screamed against the logic, aching with everything she couldn't say. She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing lightly against his. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They just stood there, staring at the horizon where the dark sea met the stars. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of all the feelings they couldn't confess aloud. Finally, Emma whispered, "Then maybe this moment is all we get." Daniel turned to her, his eyes searching hers, raw with longing. Slowly he nodded. "Maybe it is." The night stretched on, quiet except for the ocean. They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. But the connection between them was stronger than anything either had ever felt before. It burned through the silence, seared itself into their hearts. When the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Emma knew it was over. The week would end soon, and life would carry her back to the city. He would stay here in the quiet, guarding his secrets, guarding his heart. And what had sparked between them, wild, dangerous, unforgettable, would remain locked in this summer, on this beach, in this house. She looked at him one last time, memorizing the lines of his face, the depth in his eyes, the way he had looked at her like she was the only thing in the world. He didn't say anything, but the silence between them was louder than words. It said everything. Emma turned and walked back into the house, her heart aching but full. She knew she would carry this with her forever. The fire of his gaze, the honesty in his voice, the memory of a summer night when his reaction to her had been hotter than the sun itself. And though they had chosen silence, though they had chosen restraint, she knew one truth she would never forget. Sometimes the strongest love is the one you never speak, the one you hold quietly inside, burning, eternal, unbroken.